People tend to think of intelligence as being of two kinds. There is the quote-unquote real intelligence, which is what we are supposed to have. And then there's this idea of a collective intelligence. So swarms of bees, colonies of ants, shoals of fish, and so on. And people tend to think of those as radically different things. But the reality is all intelligence is collective intelligence. And this is because we are all made of parts. So you and I are collections of cells, and these cells, including neurons and various other cells in our body, have many competencies. This is because they were once separate individuals by themselves. They were unicellular organisms with all of the skills needed to survive in a complex world. And that journey that we all took, those progressive steps by which we construct ourselves, we construct our bodies, we construct our minds, that journey is maybe the most profound question in all of science. I'm Michael Levin, and I'm a developmental biologist at Tufts University. Developmental biology is maybe the most magical of all sciences because you get to see with your own eyes that journey that we all take from physics to mind. We all start out life as an unfertilized oocyte, and then slowly, gradually, step by step, that oocyte turns into a bunch of cells that self-construct an embryo, and eventually that embryo matures and becomes a large-scale adult. In the case of a human, it will be an individual with metacognitive capacities and the ability to reason, but we all have our origin in that chemistry and physics of that initial oocyte. And the magic of developmental biology is that there is a mechanism by which all of these cells get together and they are able to cooperate towards large-scale goals. This is the notion that biology uses what I call a multi-scale competency architecture, which basically means that we are not simply nested structurally in terms of cells which comprise tissues, comprising organs, bodies, and then ultimately societies and so on.
Michael Levin is a biologist and not a physicist, and so he generally stops at the cellular level when talking about these non-ordinary intelligences and the way that they structure themselves. But it is true that there is molecular intelligence. One of the basic tenets of quantum mechanics is that there is no information lost. Particles exhibit memory. Electrons know when they're being watched, for example. So this collective intelligence actually begins at the most fundamental level of the photon. And it extends, in my opinion, well beyond the cultural and the evolutionary trajectory and goal state of the human race. It's also important to note that he describes this happening in a top-down manner. So it's not the quantum realm informing the molecular, which is informing the biological, and then informing the cultural, etc. It's the higher systems that are imposing the structure and behavior on the lower systems. Of course, as far as we can tell, humans are at the top of the pyramid. And so we are the eye floating in the capstone, which basically makes gods of men. Of course, the grandest implication of this is that there is some sort of intelligence that represents the sum total of the intelligences of all of these smaller systems in aggregate, which would basically be what we commonly refer to as God. The question of the existence of God has plagued man in so many forms for so many years, and I think that we actually have a pretty reasonable argument that can be made in favor of the existence of some kind of grand intelligence. And I really have always felt very strongly that science and spirituality shouldn't be mutually exclusive. But the process of merging the two has been extremely sloppy, and it's been sloppy and inefficient and even violent because of the fact that we have had these engineered systems that people's minds have been trapped in, that they're very committed to, not because it's actually difficult. And I'm not just talking about the religious people, I'm talking about the religious people and the scientific people. And as it turns out, we can understand how this intelligence exists and why it exists by taking a look at the idea of cognitive light cones.
In 2018, there was a conference on diverse intelligence put on by the Templeton Foundation, and we were challenged by our program officer Pranab Das to think about frameworks where unconventional intelligences could all be thought about at the same time. And so there were people there working on ants and octopuses and chimpanzees and things like this. And I like with a number of things, I sort of tend to crank that knob all the way out. And so I'm interested in every kind of possible cognitive system. So we're talking cells, tissues, minimal matter, collective intelligence of groups of organisms, all kinds of artificial synthetic beings, software AIs, possible aliens, like all of it, right? So I want to know how we detect, how we understand, and how we relate to, and maybe even create diverse intelligences. What is the space of possible minds? And I'm certainly not the first person to ask that question.
Sure.
So we were thinking about all this, and I started to try to formalize the way that one could think about any possible cognitive system or any possible intelligence. And just to give it a definition, by intelligence, I don't mean the kind of second order metacognition that, for example, humans have, where you can sort of think about what you know and so on. I mean, that's one kind, but I'm talking about, when I say intelligence, I mean William James's kind of definition, where it's a competency to reach the same goal by different means. It's a very cybernetic definition. It means there's some problem space, there's some goal you're trying to reach in that problem space. It becomes a navigation task, and it asks you to think about, for any given system, how much competency does the system have in navigating its world to reach its goal, despite all kinds of new things happening, various barriers, and so on. And so I like that definition, because it's independent of the origin of the system. It doesn't matter if you're evolved or designed or some hybrid. It doesn't, because I think that there are a lot of artificial distinctions that are made in these various fields that are not facilitating progress. They're kind of blocking it, actually. So sure. I want things that are as unified as possible. I really take this unification task seriously. So I started thinking about, what if we can't rely on origin story, because I don't think that matters. If we can't rely on composition, because I don't think having a brain that looks like ours makes any difference here. What do cognitive systems have in common, right? What does it mean for something to have to have some kind of cognitive system? And so what I settled on is this notion of a cognitive light cone. And the idea is this, and this is borrowed from it's sort of upside down, actually, but it's borrowed from the way they do. Minkowski may have been the first to do it, but these kind of space-time diagrams in physics. Sure. And so what you do is you put, time is on the vertical axis. All of the dimensions of space are on the horizontal axis. And what you can define is, this cognitive light cone as the spatiotemporal size of the biggest goal that the system can pursue. And I don't mean the reach of its sensors and effectors, right? So the James Webb Telescope has this incredible sensory array that reaches to the edges of the observable universe, maybe, and so on. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not what you can sense and where you can act. I'm talking about the size of the goal state that you are the largest goal state that you are capable of pursuing. So this frames, much like James, and I think he was right, and like Wiener and colleagues before that, it frames the tasks of some type of cognition, whatever it is on that spectrum, as being fundamentally about pursuing goals of some type. And so one can sort of start with very simple. And so here it's a tick, but you can think about a bacterium or something, and it has a little bit of it has the cognitive light cone is quite small, because it has a little memory going backwards and has a little bit of predictive power going forwards in time. But what it really cares about is the local concentration of whatever molecules it cares about right at that local level. So it's very small. The cognitive light cone is very small. And you can move up to something like a dog. So that has a longer light cone going backwards. It has a little bit of more predictive capacity going forwards. And of course, spatially, it will know things like, one of the goals is to keep intruders out of its neighborhood, and the perimeter of the house, or whatever it is that's what it works on. But so that's great. That's way bigger than the tick, but or the bacterium. But what you're never going to get your dog to do, as far as we know, is to care about what happens in the town 3 miles over a month from now. It's just not going to happen. They're not capable of it, as far as we know. and then you have very large light cones like humans that may really be, well, one of the goals may be something to do with world peace and what's going to happen. Some people are literally depressed because the sun's going to burn out, and so they're working on these technologies to get us off the planet and so on. So you could, and of course we all have limitations, right? So even though the human light cone is huge, and it does have this interesting feature, maybe the first one in this evolutionary chain, maybe not, where some of those goals are guaranteed not attainable. Yeah. So if you're a goldfish and you have some goals that reach, let's say, a half an hour forward, that's absolutely attainable. You're very likely to live that long. And so all of your goals are attainable. If you're a human, it's very likely that that many of your goals are, your cognitive light cone is longer than your lifespan. They're not attainable. And that may or may not result in some psychological pressures that are unique, but I don't know. So our cognitive light cones can be huge, but they're also limited in that, for example, and this becomes important in some of our more recent work. If you think about the capacity to, what this is fundamentally about is care and compassion. And if you think about your capacity to care about the welfare of other beings, we are quite limited in the linear range. So you might have a certain amount of care about something that happens to some number of people. But if it's then, if you're told that, well, actually, it's not 1,000 people, it was actually 10,000 people that it happened to, your amount of active care is not going up tenfold. We just can't muster that level, right? But you could imagine, and you could imagine these sort of bodhisattva-like beings whose light cone is large enough where they can actually, they can literally care about a massive amount of possible sentient beings. So anyway, so that's the point of this cognitive light cone, and the idea behind all of this. And there's a follow-up paper from last year that's kind of the next version of this, which is the TAME paper, the TAME, the Technological Approach to Mind Everywhere, which extends this and really goes into this. The mechanics of what this is supposed to be. What this is supposed to be is a framework that moves these kind of questions of cognition, of sentience, of intelligence, and so on, from the area of philosophy, where people have a lot of philosophical feelings and preconceptions about what things can do and what things can't do, and it really stresses the idea that you can't just have feelings about this stuff. You have to make testable claims.
He's doing all sorts of wonderfully groundbreaking things. And, one great example is that he's sort of validating the existence of a universal mind or a sort of field that guides and informs the processes of evolution, even more so than genetics. But the idea of cognitive light cones and their utility in metaphysical purposes really hit me today when I was thinking about the fact that we have this idea that is pretty ubiquitous throughout metaphysics and spirituality, that consciousness somehow arises from light. And if you just go through a process of elimination and say, well, what else could it come from? The answer is nothing, because there are only two things in the universe, light and nothing. All forms of radiation are basically light. Matter is light in a standing wave. There's just no other culprit. And photons, as it turns out, we're not sure that they live forever or exist forever, but the lifespan is at least 1 billion years. So we have this very, very basic, fundamental constituent of consciousness that appears to be eternal. And then, we have evidence that at the molecular level, there is intelligence. Electrons know when they're being watched, for example. One study determined that a few years back. And depending on how you define intelligence, the ability to retain information, that's definitely true of atoms. But, no matter how you slice it, there is some modicum of intelligence even at the molecular level. And then what happens is that as we build on these very, very small blocks, we go from the molecular level eventually to the cellular level. And at that level, we have a bunch of constituent parts of the cell that act independently and function with some basic intelligence. And then we have the overall cell intelligence. And then the cells make up a system like the brain that obviously possesses a collective intelligence that's the product of the smaller intelligences of those cells, right? Our whole biology is like that. And then you can start looking at bigger systems like our internal organs. And then you have a light cone for that, because you have all of these things that have different functions. They themselves are all the sum total of a bunch of smaller constituent intelligences, right? And so you have bigger and bigger goals, which represent the point of the light cone as you graduate to bigger and bigger systems. So from the molecular to the cellular to the biological to the individual consciousness, right? Then you can extend that, and you have a light cone for an entire village, which has some collective purpose. Even if that's just to survive, that's still the goal of this village. And then you have nations, and then you have the entire human race as another light cone. So all of the human beings that are alive at any given point make up the base of it, and the trajectory of the entire race of humans and its ultimate fate, I guess, is the point of that light cone. So if we extend this out further, it seems logical to assume that there is some grander collective intelligence that is the sum total of all the constituent intelligent parts that has its own awareness. And that is where things start to get really sticky. Yeah, so that's basically it. If you start out at the molecular level and just scale up, all intelligence is collective intelligence. And our thought process is me speaking right now, it's not a single organism. It has that appearance, but it is actually the sum total of the interaction of particles and chemical interactions that are happening. And I'm crawling with billions and billions of organisms right now. You know what I mean? Then cellular intelligence and all that. So the thing that's actually speaking to you is collective intelligence. It is not, there's no me anywhere. There's just a collective, and the sum total of those constituent elements is able to do a light stream and discuss stuff. And so, that I think is the best possible description of, that is the argument that I would make if someone challenged me to explain, God in the new paradigm. Because I think it is extremely abundantly and painfully obvious that the old sky god mythologies are fairy tales. They are not real. They're not true. They're extremely destructive. They're extremely toxic. People make this argument with me all the time about Christianity, saying that, oh no, it can't be bad. And the thing is, if you have a background in magic, or you study the occult and you understand thought forms, even if you understand biology, you cannot grow a watermelon from an acorn seed, because the acorn seed does not contain the potential to express as a watermelon. So if you have something that is causing more death and destruction than all of the dictators in human history combined, plus all the natural disasters, and you're making the argument, no, I think it's good. He preached a little bit of solid morality here and there. It's like, my head's going to explode. It's just such a fundamental ignorance to not understand that if something, especially considering that if you take Christianity and you set it loose in the Middle East, people die. You set it loose in South America, people die. You set it loose in North America, people die. There's genocide. It's not like if you take the thing out of a context and give it a new context, it's good now. It always ends up bad. It always ends up suppressing evolution. It always ends up damaging culture. It always ends up hurting individuals. It always ends in genocide. There's no way to just repurpose it and say like, well, he did say at one point to be nice to people. So what? I mean, I've seen Hitler pet a dog. It doesn't matter. And the point is that the thing itself contains the potential to, express however it does once it's let loose as a functioning idea. So it just seems like it's extremely important for us to find the middle ground between abject materialist atheism and religion, because abject materialist atheism has had us, the oceans testing positive for benzodiazepines, school shootings, people are miserable. You know what I mean? I've been looking for keywords and search terms that are, really high ranking, trying to get my channel to grow faster. And suicide is like one of the biggest, it has the best numbers. You know what I mean? If you're really going for a viral video, probably making some like how to or not how to, don't do this video, whatever, anti-suicide video. You know what I mean, though? I mean, that's crazy when it's like one of the highest ranking Google search terms is suicide. So obviously this has not gone well. And we've already sort of created the, given the evidence for why, the standard religions have failed us. And they propagate a storybook mentality, a fantasy modality of reality that is not going to get you anywhere. I think I just lost a good friend because, once he decided that he had become spiritual, he just felt like that meant that there's a war between good and evil and that there are all these imaginary beings. And your life turns into a fucking comic book. You know what I mean? It's not helpful to you. It's not helpful to anyone, and it's not real. And the reality is that we can actually understand the universe, and we can come to determinations and understanding of real things on our own. You don't need a book. You don't need a shaman. You don't need anything. I mean, you might need a shaman or something in the early stages of your development, but eventually, you develop a process. You can learn a process to interact with the universe in a way that allows you to uncover the truth about things. That's what's so powerful about alchemy, for example. I posted a short that actually has done really well about alchemy, really well by my standards, I guess. And the amount of ridicule and just stupidity in the comments that I've gotten is just mind-blowing. People really are, they're confined by the parameters that have been dictated to them by the overlords and the thought police, right? They have very narrow channels that they're allowed to run in. And one of the things that I've noticed is that even if you present them with proof, if it goes against an idea that is fundamental enough, they will reject it. They will fight against it. There was somebody in the comment section that was like laughing, like, oh yeah, right. Like you can turn hair into wine or whatever. Like, I mean, that example is completely dumb anyways. But the point is that we have actually determined that you can change any element into any other element by adding and subtracting protons. I mean, you can subtract them a lot easier than you can add them. But, even after explaining this, they were still saying like, oh, well, I guess water into wine is possible. So I don't know. I guess anything's possible. And it's like, it's already been done. Like it's you can do it in lots of laboratories all around the world. It's just not cost efficient to like make gold that way. So the point being that, people are very much trapped within the parameters of whatever has been dictated to them by the I don't know what. And I think, anchoring bias is a huge difficulty because whatever information people get first, they tend to kind of stick with. So if someone tells them, it's not possible to transmute lead into gold, which is what I was told in school, that you couldn't transmute elements, and the ancients were stupid because they thought you could. And it turns out that's true. You need mercury as well. Unless you're doing it in a, modern laboratory, you need mercury and a small amount of gold and a high voltage electric shock. But they definitely were doing it. If you're a patron, and you should be, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are in-depth descriptions of this process that is, it's really obvious it's the same one that's performed today. But what I'm getting at here is that one of the great powerful things about the alchemical process is that it is a microcosm of the macrocosm, in the sense that you can see the great truths of the universal process displayed in the alchemical process. So you start out with the prima materia, a sort of neutral organic substance, and it blackens, and then it turns colors, and then it becomes gold, right? And this is the dweller at the threshold, crossing the abyss, dark night of the soul, illumination and enlightenment. right? I mean, it's exactly the process that an individual human goes through. Also, one of the most difficult things for people to accept, I think, that achieve any degree of actual illumination, because it's just sort of morally challenging, is that there is no such thing as sin. There are no rules. Nothing is true and everything is permissible. God is not, fear not that any God will deny thee for anything, really. That sort of thing. And to make it even worse, the antinomies that interact produce each other. So good makes evil and evil creates good. And when you are, going through the alchemical process, you notice that it has to blacken before the colors emerge and then the gold is made. Right? So that darkness and putrefaction is literally what creates the good. And that fact that the universe is a perfect union of contrary things, and it always will be. There's never going to be a new earth. There's never going to be a perfect period where there's no more sadness. And there might be in some other dimension, who knows? But as far as this dualistic plane goes, it cannot exist if the dualistic, it's predicated on the laws such as they are, because they cannot be any other way. It will not. It'll cease to exist. But yeah, so that's it. I mean, through observation of nature, you come to understanding of the non-physical phenomena. And I really think that light cone example of how we can understand how collective intelligence would eventually, equal some sort of, godlike mind. I think it's pretty obvious that all of the religious conceptions of what that is are children's versions of the actual reality of that thing. Molecular intelligence adds up to cellular intelligence, adds up to biological intelligence, adds up to cultural intelligence, adds up to race intelligence, adds up to the universal fucking mind. I mean, it's that simple, And the thing is, it's basically certain, It's nearly certain that so here's the thing about the photon and whether consciousness is actually eternal or not, right? Because let's assume that consciousness actually does arise at the level of the photon, right? So I would imagine that that's just some base level, very fundamental type of awareness. The thing is, though, photons don't just make light. They're not fireflies. That's not how it works. It is the movement at the speed of light of the photon that interacts with the electromagnetic field that almost creates a spark. And that's what you see when you see light. This trail of this thing fucking blazing through the universe, ripping the fabric of space and time apart or whatever it's doing. But let's say that is, true. The question then becomes, does the awareness belong to the photon itself, or is it a vector contingent of the interaction of the photon with the electromagnetic field? In which case, it might not be eternal, because it's just a, vector function or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just this interaction of the field and the point in the circle, basically, is how the occult would symbolize it, at least our tradition. But I think the fact that we experience some kind of stable continuity of existence indicates that it is continuous. In fact, many years ago, it hit me that I felt like the only way that matter could crystallize, basically, is if it was actually moving at the speed of light. And I was just glancing through some papers the other day, and I saw some paper some physicist had written. The title basically was "Everything is moving at the speed of light." And that would explain our continuity. In fact, in my mind, that's the only thing that would explain that continuity. But then we have another issue. If everything is moving at the speed of light, what is this base light speed that then has a maximum speed away from it of the speed of light? That's a bit difficult to wrap our head around. I guess in that context, it would mean that there are tiers of speeds of light, right? So all the matter in the universe is moving at the speed of light, and then again, you can move the speed of light, another interval or something. I'm having trouble, I'm going to have to do some more research. And it's, it doesn't solve all of our questions. It doesn't tell us, what exactly goes through the mind of the sum total of intelligence, if anything. I've always felt that our purpose here in the universe was just to experience the universe and to gather the fulfillment of possibilities into our emotional and psychological travel bag and pack it away for whatever comes next. And so, it's interesting to try to imagine what it would be like to have a consciousness that is the sum total of every living being, and really, more than that, because it's just as much the sum total of quantum intelligence and cellular intelligence and all of these other smaller forms of intelligence that make up the illusion that we have one intelligence. In fact, it might be up there thinking that it is just one intelligence and completely unaware of all the little parts and pieces that make it up. It is also interesting to note, though, that I did once have an experience I drank way too much San Pedro. Too much to not lose consciousness every once in a while, but it was exactly the right amount from the perspective of what I gained, I guess. But I became an individual photon. And then the cactus was like, watch what happens if we take one of these photons away, and the whole universe disappeared. And it was this demonstration of the perfect balance of the entire thing. Like if one little element of it didn't exist or was different, the whole thing would just disappear, according to that vision. What's going on, Soggy Mids? But what I'm saying is that I feel like I did for a moment have the experience of seeing from the point of view of a photon instead of a human. I don't really know how to talk about that, though, because it's really subjective. There's not really a lot I can say about it. But the point is, I wonder if this greater mind doesn't also have that experience, if intermittently. Perhaps it's able to look through all of these TV screens simultaneously and actually have an awareness of that. That's hard to wrap my head around, but I guess it's not out of the question. I think that what our best bet is probably to remember as above, so below, microcosm, macrocosm. Just as we don't have an awareness of the individual cells that make up our consciousness, that contribute to our existence, I would imagine that the universal mind probably does not either. Generally speaking, So yeah, I'm going to keep it short tonight because I feel like that's all there really is to say about that. I'm going to let you guys know also that you should hit the like button and share, subscribe, and support us on Cash App or Zelle or cryptocurrency or something, because we're demonetized. And even though our numbers are exploding this month, there's no revenue in that for me. So if you appreciate these light streams, I appreciate your support. And also keep your eyes out. I'm going to start doing a weekly sort of a reaction video, but like commentary to one of Michael Levin's talks or experiments. I'm going to go through every single video I can find, and I'm going to do them one a week. until I've gone through all of it, because what appears to be happening with him is that he's sort of redefining our understanding of nature, and the universe, but he's doing it in the way that Terence McKenna predicted, that it's actually a return to the archaic. And, these ideas that there is, that one of his theories is mind everywhere, which sounds an awful lot like all is mind, right? It's just this old panpsychism, and it's, I think, a product of the process that I've been describing in this light stream, where the old restrictive, delusional belief systems are, when they're stripped away, reality is there. It's no different than taking a mask off and looking in the mirror. It's just laid bare in the absence of these distortions. And intentional misdirection and all the rest of it. And so it seems to me that Michael Levin is just a scientist who did not allow the cultural dictates to define the parameters of his thought. And so he has gone beyond that. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I may even jump on and do a music stream. I got some new strings, and I've been practicing a bunch. So kind of feeling the music maybe tonight. But yeah, I mean, Gabby, the brain definitely picks stuff up when you're sleeping. So, and it's probably good that you asked that, because I think a lot of our inability to comprehend things a lot of times, and our difficulties in acquiring new information, come from our beliefs about our limitations. And so if your conscious mind is shut down so that you don't have your ego in there telling you that you don't understand, the information will just feed right directly into your brain, unobstructed. So sure, give that a try. All right, guys, I will see you again very soon. Keep your eyes out for my Robert Anton Wilson video. It's the only time I've ever made a piece of content where I actually started getting choked up because I realized how powerful the message was. So it seems like I'm up in my game. Hope all you guys are there for it. And we'll see you again very soon. Peace.